Hello, it's Liz. Um, so I kind of have been planning this for a bit, and I'm just gonna try to knock it out real quick because I've got 40 minutes before I have to go pick up my child, and yeah, I'm not gonna edit this. So anyway, I just really wanted to get this out there because I think it's important. Probably one of the more important videos I could make, and maybe someday I'll have the time and energy to make it better. But it is what to do if you have a loved one who is in a psychotic episode. So this is kind of an emergency situation, right? I mean, depending on what they're doing, it might be more of an emergency or less, but it's something that needs to be dealt with as soon as possible because the longer they stay in a psychosis, the harder it is for them to recover. And some people don't recover. So this is important. And it's really hard. This is really hard. I've been on both sides of this a few times. And I'm probably, I mean, I don't want to burst my own bubble, but there is no perfect way to do this. And even if you know all of the sort of best practices or whatever, they're very, very difficult to actually implement in the moment unless you have special training and really repeated practice because it's hard. So anyway, I'm going to start. The first thing I'd say is try to stay calm. It's a lot easier said than done. It helps to remember that most people who are psychotic are not violent, that the strange ways in which they're acting are, I mean, I don't know. This is not to say that you should normalize the way they're acting because it's not normal. It is ill. But try to remind yourself that they're unlikely to hurt you and that I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it. It's very unnerving, I know, in to deal with somebody who's in that kind of state. But the more scared you are, the more scared they're probably going to become of you or suspicious of you. I mean, I remember, when I've been in that place that like being around people who were scared of me or scared for me or just scared in general, it would just rub off on me really quickly and I'd get more and more scared. And if they seemed suspicious of me, then I'd feel suspicious of them. And if they seemed to be conspiring behind my back, which is something you kind of have to do sometimes when somebody's in a mental health crisis. But if they get a sense of it at all, they might react pretty intensely to that. So yeah, so do everything you can to try to stay calm and keep the atmosphere calm. Try to center yourself and ground yourself because they'll really feed on what you're feeling. They're being in that kind of heightened state makes you very, very sensitive to the emotions of others. I mean, empathic in the sense that they'll just really, they may just immediately really feel whatever feeling is in the room. If you can, this is the next step. If you can, if this is applicable, try to call or get a hold of their mental health professionals. Now, sometimes psychosis happens when a person hasn't had any diagnosis yet and don't have any mental health treatment yet. But if they do, they're going to be one of the first calls you want to make. Maybe the first call you want to make if you have that information. It might not make sense to ask them for that information, but if there's some way you can find it, or if you already know. And this is like, I'm also going to make a video at some point about how to do safety plans for this kind of thing, how to do preventative care, because these are things, hopefully, if you're a close friend or family member, that you already know all of this information, all of their health information and their mental health providers, so that you don't have to try to figure this out in an emergency. Um, yeah, because it's really hard. One of the difficult things about getting mental health treatment when you're in an emergency is that you're in a very sensitive psychological state and having to deal with people who have no idea who you are, don't know your history, don't know, if you have past trauma, if you have other diagnoses, and just don't know you. They don't know your personality. They don't necessarily know how to differentiate between your eccentricities and personal kind of fun weirdness and your illness. Um, yeah, so ideally, you can find mental health professionals that have some history with the person to at least facilitate the process if they have to go into a hospital. Okay, this is a big one. Number 3. I haven't been numbering these, but this is number 3. Do not challenge their delusions. Don't argue with them. Don't invalidate them. Just don't. It's very tempting because we live in this, you know, classically liberal society where we like to think that you can just argue with people about things and reason will prevail. But that's not even true of like most people generally, and it's definitely not true of somebody who's psychotic. When you're in a space like that, when you're in psychosis, it's like, I don't know if this is really a good word to use, but it's sort of like hyper induction or something. It's like you aren't really capable of going through a sort of calm, logical process of thinking. It's more like, you see something and it seems like a symbol of something else, and your mind makes these connections. It happens really fast, and suddenly you just absolutely know with 100% certainty that X, Y, and Z is true. It's you can't reason somebody out of that kind of like feeling of certainty. It's too intense, and their mind is moving too fast to like stop and consider the fallacies or leaps that they've made. That you just can't. It doesn't work. And what is going to happen if you do that is they're going to be very suspicious of you, or they'll get angry, and they won't want to deal with you anymore. Especially if their delusions are at all paranoid, they're going to think that you're one of them, that you're working for the bad guys or whatever, that you are not to be trusted. That's what they're gonna glean from the conversation. So just don't. It's tricky. You don't necessarily want to encourage their delusions either. So it's best to try and stay neutral, validate their feelings, and to a certain extent, you may find yourself. Sometimes it's not a bad idea to actually kind of manipulate them using their delusions. I know that sounds horrible, but like if you need to convince them to do something that's important, that's going to help them, maybe even save their life or something, you're going to have to frame your argument in terms of their delusional thinking. So, like, I wish I could give you a good example off the top of my head, but if you need somebody to take their medication or to come with you to the hospital, you can kind of try to frame it in terms of whatever it is that they're thinking about the world, and try to make it seem, using their current delusional values and their current delusional sort of beliefs, use those things to structure an argument that will make internal sense to them as to why they should do those things. It might not be possible because they might have already decided in some hard and fast way that they shouldn't go to the hospital or that they shouldn't take their meds. That happens a lot. But if it's possible to be a little flexible with it, that can be a huge thing that'll really help them. You just have to be able to deliver it without any kind of condescension. You really have to be able to serve that. To you're going to need to show them through the way that you talk to them about it, that you're not pretending to believe what they're saying, but that you really are, in the same reality, which is some acting, and you may or may not be able to pull that off. If you can't, just try to stick with being neutral and validating feelings and that kind of thing. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this next one gets back to kind of what I said earlier. Avoid conspiring against them. Not against them, conspiring about them as much as possible. Try to avoid the conspiracies. And to the extent that you need to conspire, try to do it in a way that they're not going to get any whiff of it. And this is hard and it's not always possible. But if you can, it's worth doing, because this will really erode your trust with them very quickly. And them trusting you is the best thing for them if you are a person who's trying to get them real help. Do not sacrifice that unless it's absolutely necessary. I should say probably until it's absolutely necessary, because you probably will have to do something that upsets them at some point. So, treat them respectfully. I mean, this is really important. And this is where a lot of this kind of like ableist bias can be really, really harmful to somebody who's in a crisis. Our society has trained us to be very dehumanizing to people who are mentally ill. We make fun of them. They're the butt of jokes. We demonize them. We, when somebody starts behaving in a way that might seem emotionally unstable or mentally ill, we're very quick to write them off, to use those facts to attack them and attack their character, dismiss them, all kinds of stuff. I'm guilty of this too. It's just endemic in our culture. And that's not to say that we need to pretend that people who are mentally ill are not mentally ill. That's damaging too. But we do need to find a way to be respectful, especially, when we're dealing with them, even when we're not. I mean, just because somebody is having a psychotic episode or whatever does not mean that they can't hear what you say and that they don't understand what's going on. They may be lucid in some ways, even if they're way out there in other ways. So don't underestimate them. Be respectful. Stay respectful. It means a lot. It really means a lot. Remember that just because somebody is going through a psychosis doesn't mean they're not a full person and a full adult. And even if they're not able to make all of their own decisions in that moment, and maybe really need somebody else to make some decisions for them, that they still deserve to be treated with sort of basic human dignity. And as much as possible, be aware of what's going on. It's a tricky line to walk sometimes, because sometimes you can't tell them what's going on. But as much as possible, please do. Please treat them like adults to the extent that it is appropriate at the time. Okay. So this is one that's more protective for you, because if you're, it's extremely draining to deal with somebody who's psychotic. It's scary. It's takes a lot of emotional strength. You may not have it. I understand. I do. No judgment. Um, so one of the things you really need to do is have firm boundaries. You need to have, and you need to take stock in any moment that you have a chance to do this. Take some stock of what are you willing to do in this situation? What are your limits? Because no matter how much you care about somebody, you may or may not be able to save them. And especially with something like psychosis, I would, of course, encourage you to help your family members. I mean, there's nothing more important than, or friends. There's nothing more important than support for somebody who's going through something like this. But at the same time, you got to manage your expectations a little bit, because no matter what you do and how much you sacrifice, you may not be able to salvage your relationship with them or their mental health. This is a very difficult situation. And so you got to get realistic with yourself about what is reasonable for you to do and extend yourself, because you have your own life. You may have plenty of your own stressors. You may have your own mental health issues that you need to take care of. So try to be realistic about that and create some boundaries and enforce them. I would definitely discourage getting aggressive with somebody who is in that state. Although it might, sometimes it gets to a point where you know, you might not be able to help yourself. But try to keep those boundaries firm, but deliver and enforce them in a way that's calm and respectful, just firm and consistent. That helps to provide them with some kind of structure too, in this sort of chaos that they're experiencing in their reality right now. So that can actually be a actively good thing for them, for you to just calmly and firmly state and enforce your boundaries with them. So yeah, do that. Don't feel bad about it. Oh, okay. This is a big one, because this is what everyone wants to do. Do not try to hold them accountable right now. I, I'm still planning to do that whole other video about mental health and culpability, accountability. I think it's a very complex topic, but what's not complex is that you should not do that right now. Don't do it right now. This is the wrong time. They're not in a place where they're going to be accountable. They can't do it right now. And if you're trying to hold them accountable right now, honestly, you're just kind of making this all about you. They are probably going to be disrespectful. They're probably going to they might say some really nasty things to you. They might say some things that are very disturbing and confusing. They might lash out against, you or other people that you care about. They might do some things that are deeply inappropriate and upsetting, or just that maybe even just upsetting because they don't make sense. There's all kinds of things this person might do. Now is not the time to try to get them to apologize or understand what it, because in their version of reality that explains why they did all these things is completely different from yours. It's not reconcilable right now. Just don't. And yeah, all you're going to do is make the situation worse and kind of make it about you and your feelings. This isn't about you. And if you're having too many feelings about them, you need to step away from the situation, because you have become the wrong person to deal with it. I mean, I guess there's situations where you might be the only person, in which case that's messy and it sucks. I couldn't tell you what to do. But if there are other people that can help and you're too upset with them to let it go for the moment, you need to walk away. Okay. What's the next one? Oh, and this is kind of goes along with this, but don't take things personally. This is hard. I know this is hard. Um, I have not done this perfectly when I have been on that side of things. Um, Especially after if you spend a lot of time with somebody who's in that kind of heightened state, it wears you down, and eventually I became pretty raw and just I lost the my patience and my ability to be the grounded person. So I understand. But the goal is to just continually remind yourself that what's going on with them, unless you personally did something to trigger that their episode, you really should not be taking any of this personally, because it's not about you. It's because when you're psychotic, everyone and everything around you kind of becomes like, it's almost dreamlike, in that everything becomes sort of an archetype or a symbol, and you're sort of projecting all of your own feelings and anxiety and fear and whatever onto everything that's around. So it becomes increasingly, as it gets more intense, more and more about just sort of your own mind. And yeah, so that's where they're at. It's not about you, again, unless you happen to do something like you traumatized them and that triggered an episode, in which case you really should not be at all involved in their recovery. You definitely, if they're not making that boundary, you need to make it, because that's not right. That's really messed up. I actually know somebody who tried to do that with my other friend, like friend A, or ex friend. Yeah, ex friend, because I don't associate with this person anymore, was really emotionally abusive, triggered a psychotic episode in friend B, and then tried to get involved in this friend's recovery. And it was really disgusting. What's next? Oh, yeah. Okay. If they take medication, this is probably an obvious one, but try to see if you can give it to them, get them to take it. Sometimes medication is actually what triggers these things, though. So that's kind of a tricky one. And there's also a high likelihood that they're just going to be unwilling to take meds. And if you try to slip it into, something, like if you try to get them their meds non-consensually, that's a pretty big risk. Might be worth it. I don't know. That's very contextual. Um, okay. Now, before you call the cops, call 211, or if you happen to already know of services that will dispatch mental health professionals to mental health emergencies, make that call. But if you call 211, they should be able to tell you if there's anything like that in the area, or if there's anywhere that you can bring them. And you might have to trick them into going with you. I mean, that's one thing you can do. Um, it's something people did successfully to me several times. You know, I Yeah, in fact, every time I've successfully I've gone to the hospital during a psychosis, it's because people brought me there. They didn't really necessarily explain where we were going, but somehow they got me there, like by driving. The one time that somebody called the police for me, it was kind of pointless because they didn't do anything, and it was pretty traumatizing. If the person is the kind of person that tends to be a target of police violence, such as if they're Black, if they're Native American, if they, on top of their mental illness, have other forms of disability, any number of other things. Those are the big ones that come to mind. If they're in any of those populations, or there's a person of color in general, I would really exercise. I would suggest exercising as much caution as possible in terms of calling the police. There aren't always other options, though, and if that person is doing things that are getting to the point where they're going to harm themselves or others, and you can't deal with it with yourself and your community and any of the resources that you have available to you that are non-police, you may have to call the police. In which case, call the non-emergency police. The only time that you should call 911 is if, they're like literally killing themselves or someone else, or, like, I know it feels like an emergency, and it is in a way. I mean, it's a crisis, but you want to call the non-emergency police. A lot of the reason that people get killed during police encounters is because police go there all jacked up, assuming that, they're going to have to shoot someone. So if you call the non-emergency police, they're not going to be, it's not as likely they're going to be in that mindset. And usually when someone's psychotic, it's not, I mean, okay, it's a crisis and it is urgent, but it's not an emergency. Nobody is about to die. I think that is pretty much it, right? Is anybody about to die? No, not emergency police. And if you're watching this because you are in this situation right now, I wish you all the luck in the world. It's really hard. There's no absolutely right way to do this. And if you are doing your best with the intention of helping this person, then you're doing a great job. Okay. Good luck.